Okay, so let's dive into these sources. They drop us right into Los Angeles, don't they? Talk about protests related to immigration enforcement.
Yeah, starting Friday evening. And the sources mention some clashes happening as well.
Right, clashes. But then there's this significant development mentioned, a big reaction to these
A
events.
really major one, yeah.
It's the deployment of the National Guard, is that right?
That's it, a key development reported in the material.
Okay, so that's a huge step. So for this deep dive, our mission is really to unpack that specific decision just using the statements we have right here in these sources.
Exactly, trying to understand the different perspectives given.
And we have viewpoints from the White House and also from the California governor. Those are the key players mentioned here.
Correct. So maybe let's start with the White House angle. There's a statement from Saturday evening from the press secretary, Caroline Levitt.
Okay, yeah, let's look at that. How does that statement frame this deployment? What's the reasoning given?
Well, it presents it as um, a necessary step. It says President Donald Trump signed a memorandum.
A memo. Okay.
Yeah, specifically deploying 2,000 National Guardsmen to address the lawlessness in California, while these demonstrations are ongoing.
Address the lawlessness.
Yeah.
Wow, okay, that's very direct language. So positioning the Guard as a tool to restore order, basically.
Citing a presidential order and giving that specific number, 2,000 troops.
2,000. Got it. Now, what's really interesting is comparing that to the reaction from California's governor, Gavin Newsom. The sources mentioned his statement came earlier on Saturday.
And the contrast is, well, it's pretty stark.
It really seems to be. According to the source material, Governor Newsom described this exact same move as purposefully inflammatory.
Purposefully inflammatory. And not just that, he also claimed the federal government was trying to take over the California National Guard.
Take over.
Yeah.
That's a serious charge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Suggesting a federal grab for state power.
Definitely sounds like it. And the source quotes him predicting it would, quote, only escalate tensions.
So let me just recap this based on our sources. You have the White House perspective, necessary federal action, presidential memo, 2,000 troops to tackle lawlessness.
That's their framing.
And then you have the governor's perspective on the same action. Purposefully inflammatory, an attempt to take over state forces, and something that will likely make things worse, escalate tensions.
It's two completely different ways of interpreting the event and what it means, what its impact will be.
Yeah, it really underscores how the specific words leaders choose are so critical.
Absolutely. Even when they're talking about the same objective fact, like troops being deployed, the language frames the purpose and the likely outcome in totally opposite ways.
One side says restoring order.
And the other implies provoking disorder, or at least challenging state authority.
So what this really shows us, drawing just from these sources, is how during times of, civil unrest, different levels of government aren't just reacting, they're actively messaging.
Right, they're shaping the narrative, using specific terms.
Exactly. Defining the problem like lawlessness and presenting their solution like the federal deployment. Or, alternatively, defining the federal action itself as the problem, using words like inflammatory or takeover.
It really brings the whole issue of authority and how it's projected and perceived right to the forefront.
So, thinking about this specific clash described in the sources, where you have federal and state leaders disagreeing so publicly and so sharply, not just on the action, but on its likely effect.
Yeah, it's quite a disagreement.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? It really highlights the complexities around authority and just plain communication when things are tense. So here's something maybe for you, the listener, to think about based purely on these statements we've looked at.
What does this particular divergence tell us?
Yeah, how does this stark difference in framing, one calling it necessary order, the other inflammatory overreach, actually shape how an event like this is understood by the public?
Okay.
Just based on the language used by leaders, something to consider.